Is Gen Z actually as poor as they claim to be? Gen Z, the generation born roughly between 1997 and 2012, has been making headlines for everything from TikTok trends to climate activism. But one of the most pressing conversations surrounding this generation is money. Gen Z is loud about their financial struggles, often talking about how they can't afford homes, are drowning in debt, and feel like they're falling behind economically. But is that just online venting, or is there real truth behind the complaints? Today, we're diving deep into the numbers, the psychology, and the context behind Gen Z's economic reality. Is Gen Z really broke, or do they just feel that way? What Gen Z says about money. If you spend 5 minutes on social media, you'll find Gen Z talking about financial stress. Posts about skipping meals to save money, memes about living paycheck to paycheck, and frustration over rent, gas, and student loans dominate platforms like TikTok and X. Phrases like late-stage capitalism, no future, and can't even dream of owning a home are common. And it's not just jokes. Many Gen Zers are genuinely worried about whether they'll ever achieve financial security. But what's behind this anxiety? Are they actually earning less, or is this a case of expectations clashing with reality? Wages versus cost of living. Let's start with the basics, income. According to recent data from Pew Research and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Gen Z workers age 18 to 24 earn an average annual income of about $35,000 to $45,000, depending on education and region. On the surface, this may seem reasonable for someone early in their career. But now let's look at costs. Housing prices have skyrocketed. In many U.S. cities, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is over $1,500. Student debt is at record levels. Groceries, transportation, and healthcare have all seen sharp price increases in recent years. When you adjust for inflation and rising costs of living, Gen Z's wages don't stretch nearly as far as they did for previous generations at the same age. So yes, in terms of purchasing power and expenses, Gen Z is facing a tougher environment. The role of student debt. Another major financial hurdle for Gen Z is student loans. College tuition has more than doubled over the past 2 decades. As a result, many Gen Z graduates are leaving school with $30,000 or more in student debt. This debt directly impacts their ability to save, invest, or make big life decisions like buying a home or starting a family. And while some policy efforts like student loan pauses or forgiveness programs have provided relief, the underlying cost of education continues to rise. Previous generations also had student loans, but the scale and burden Gen Z faces are far greater. Employment in the gig and creator economy. Another important factor is how Gen Z earns money. Unlike earlier generations who pursued long-term careers with benefits and pensions, Gen Z is much more involved in freelance, gig, or creator-based work. Whether it's driving for Uber, freelancing online, or building a brand on YouTube or TikTok, many Gen Zers are navigating a new and often unstable income landscape. This can mean huge potential earnings, but also massive volatility. Some Gen Z creators pull in 6 figures. Others can barely pay rent. And many of these jobs come with no health insurance, no retirement contributions, and little job security. So even though Gen Z is resourceful and entrepreneurial, the financial consistency just isn't there for many of them. Wealth versus income. Here's a crucial distinction. Income is how much you earn. Wealth is how much you keep. Gen Z might not have the lowest incomes, but their wealth, meaning assets like savings, investments, and property, is dramatically low. According to the Federal Reserve, Gen Z holds less than 2% of total U.S. wealth, despite making up over 20% of the population. Millennials, who are now in their 30s and early 40s, only hold about 5%. By contrast, baby boomers still hold over 50% of the nation's wealth. So when Gen Z says they're poor, they're not just talking about paychecks. They're talking about having no financial cushion, no property, no long-term assets, and often no real safety net. Perception versus reality. But now let's complicate things a little. While Gen Z often feels poor, not all of them actually are. A growing number of Gen Zers live at home longer, which can reduce expenses. Some have access to family support or inheritances. Many use financial tools like Robinhood or crypto trading, which weren't as accessible to past generations. There's also a cultural factor. Gen Z has grown up in the age of hyper-comparison. They scroll past luxury vacations, designer outfits, and high-rise apartments on Instagram every day. The result? A skewed perception of what normal wealth looks like. This creates a paradox. Gen Z might not be objectively poorer than every previous generation, but they feel poorer, especially compared to what they see online and what they expected adulthood to look like. The changing definition of success. Another twist is how Gen Z defines success. For older generations, success was often tied to buying a house, settling down, and climbing the corporate ladder. But Gen Z tends to value freedom, flexibility, and work-life balance. Many choose jobs that align with their values, even if they pay less. Others reject hustle culture entirely, seeking a slower, more intentional life. And that's not a bad thing, but it does mean that traditional financial metrics might not tell the whole story. To some extent, Gen Z's poverty isn't just about dollars, it's about disillusionment with a system that doesn't seem to reward hard work the way it used to. Are they spending too much? Here's a common counterpoint. Maybe Gen Z just spends irresponsibly. The daily coffees, avocado toasts, streaming subscriptions, festival tickets. It's become a cliche, but data tells a different story. Gen Z is actually more financially cautious than people think. Many are delaying marriage, skipping car ownership, and avoiding credit card debt. In fact, some studies show they save more aggressively than millennials did at the same age. What they are spending on is experiences, wellness, and tech. Often small joys that provide a break from financial stress. So while individual spending habits vary, the stereotype of Gen Z as reckless spenders doesn't really hold up. The long-term picture. Gen Z may be struggling now, but they also have time on their side. They're still young. Many haven't hit their peak earning years. As they gain experience, skills, and stability, their financial situation may improve, especially if systemic changes happen in education, housing, and labor rights. At the same time, the challenges they face, like climate change, automation, and economic inequality, aren't going away. Whether Gen Z thrives financially in the long run may depend not just on individual choices, but on political and economic reforms.
Generation has its flaws, and I would say ours is definitely social media and the constant, on our phones, scrolling, TikTok, Instagram, all of it.
So is Gen Z actually poor? The answer is, it depends on how you define poor. Gen Z might not be starving, but many are financially insecure, deeply anxious about the future, and locked out of the traditional wealth-building paths that older generations relied on. Their struggles are real, but so is their resilience. They're navigating a tough economy with creativity, grit, and a new set of values. Whether they end up better or worse off than their predecessors remains to be seen. But one thing's for sure, the conversation around Gen Z and money is far from over. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the system, and most importantly, keep learning.